We are going to be talking about being out for equal, where every LGBT colleague can thrive at work. Thank you, Lizzie, for joining us today. Thank you, Vinay. Vinay's coming in from New York. Christos is in Manchester, correct? We've got Thorsten from Switzerland, and I'm here in London. So you've got a great kind of, plethora of. Oh, we've got Melanie back. Melanie, I was just stepping in for you.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Perfect. I'm going to hand back over to you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened with my internet. It just suddenly decided to drop on me. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today's session is going to be talking about what has been done to raise visibility of LGBTQ people to amplify their voices. Is there a requirement for safe spaces in the remote working model? And how the power of sharing lived experiences can be a really powerful tool. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Melanie Wolfenden. I'm an Oracle Cloud Solutions Architect at Fujitsu. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also the proud chair of Fujitsu Pride European region. And I helped get the global network of Fujitsu Pride going as well. But less about me, and let's meet our amazing panel. So I'm proud today to be joined by the head of people and culture at Auto Trader UK, and that's Christos Sopranos. I think you might have just met while I was offline. Christos is the organizational and cultural leader and diversity inclusion advocate. He has a career stemming across different organizations in digital and social housing. Driven by his passion, he leads the DE&I corporate social responsibility strategies, and is working for one of the most admired digital businesses in the UK and a top 50 inclusive company. And Christos' pronouns are he, him. So welcome, Christos. Have we lost Christos?
I think so.
This one's going really well. We're doing great.
Okay, so maybe Christos will join us. Also on our panel today is the head of HR in Switzerland for Johnson & Johnson, Thorsten Eger. Thorsten's pronouns are he, him. Thorsten has experience in global human resources. He's been working in leading healthcare, including Johnson & Johnson, Roche, and Novartis. He's also worked for high-tech companies like T-Systems, T-Mobile, and Deutsche Telekom. And he's actually lived in 5 different countries: Germany, Switzerland, UK, Russia, and Canada. And I believe he loves traveling and has been to over 60 countries. He has a passion for yoga and hiking in his spare time. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, Thorsten.
Thanks a lot, Melanie, and thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Happy to be here.
Great stuff. We've also got on our panel today, we're joined by one of our future leaders, Lizzie Finch. Currently, Lizzie's working in a HR recruitment administrator for a media company. Lizzie is non-binary and uses the pronouns they, them. And during their placement in the year at university, Lizzie worked for the Inclusive Diversity and Gender Pay Gap undergraduate at Pfizer, a company that we're all very aware of and has become a household name, particularly recently. Lizzie was very involved in creating the UK's transitioning in the workplace policy guidelines. And after that, Lizzie's experiences during their placement meant that it motivated them to pursue freelance work after university, and is now a workshop leader in trans and non-binary inclusion in the workplace. So it's great to have you on the panel today, Lizzie.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to be here. It's great to have a good chat this afternoon.
And finally, last but not least, joining us from the US today is an accomplished global speaker, has done lots of presentations, engagements all across the world, Vinay Kapoor. Vinay's pronouns are he, him, and he's just taken on the role of a senior vice president and global chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer at FactSet. Prior to FactSet, Vinay worked in investment banking at BNP Paribas for over 21 years. He started off in the UK and rose to the head of UK diversity and inclusion in London, and then moved on to being the head of diversity and inclusion in the Americas. much of
Pleasure to be
his
here.
passion. Hey,
You have more to go.
sorry, I was just going to say, having personally had lots of exclusion during various points of his personal and professional life, this ignites his passion for the power of collaboration to help drive meaningful change in business. And actually, Vinay advocates for equality and social justice inside and outside the workplace. Anyway, it's great for you to take time out of your busy days today to join us. So without further ado, let's get going. So we've just coming out of a global pandemic, and many of our businesses, as you know, were forced to work remotely and take on a different model of work. So just going to find out about from what you guys have been doing to sort of raise the visibility of LGBTQ people and amplify their voices in the last year. Torsten, I'm going to start with you because I'm aware that Johnson & Johnson is highly distributed, has lots of locations all over the world. What's that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks for the question. And indeed, you know, in Switzerland, I'm speaking now more about the Switzerland organization. Throughout the pandemic, we had more than a dozen sites, which means we have a very distributed workforce. So this means we need to go as an LGBTIQ strategy that builds on both on-site activities but virtual activities at the same time, because we simply have too many sites to be able to be on site everywhere at the same time, etc. And therefore, we were quite used to that model. And of course, with COVID, we didn't change a lot, to be very honest. We reduced the on-site activities a bit more and leveraged more the virtual activities and set more signs like illuminating buildings, raising the flags on all sides, making sure that the community gets virtually supported by the right technology, the facilitation in behind. They were very, very active, provided speaking sessions, not personally on sites anymore, but virtually, and invited a lot of participants and co-workers in the country. So it didn't feel that this had a huge impact on the visibility. It was because we had it in the past virtually already. So it was more like we accelerated the virtual and the technology usage. So therefore it was visible and didn't feel like a real change, to be very honest.
And
at least from my perspective. I don't know, others might see it differently.
And I would echo that as well. And I remember when the pandemic, first hit, there was a lot of, what are we going to do now kind of thing. And, for me, it's, we definitely have not taken our foot off the gas. It's, in fact, perhaps even harder. And so both in my previous one at BNP and here at FactSet as well, it's really to continue to accelerate and increase that visibility. So we absolutely were celebrating Global Pride Month globally throughout all of our offices as well. With a variety of speaker events, informational events that are happening throughout the month as well. And and I think it's really important not to take your foot off the gas, for organizations not to take the foot off their gas. I know that there's a lot of content out there, and I know that it can feel, that there's a lot out there at the moment, but it's so important for organizations not to take their foot off the gas and to continue going, just as Thorsten mentioned as well, to continue and to redouble down on efforts, in fact.
So is there any specific things that you did that you're kind of really proud about, that you've sort of wins during that time? Is there any particular events that really worked?
To me or to any of the panelists?
Vinny, go on while you were talking.
So one of the things that I'm really keen, I'm really proud of, is that we launched an allyship guide, and on, for staff on how to be allies to the LGBTQ+ community here at FactSet as well. But I'm also really proud of the fact that, we've continued to engage in our recruitment initiatives. For example, we sponsored the RISE job fair in India for LGBTQ talent as well. So, so I'm particularly proud of some of those, which is, one of the premier and biggest LGBT job recruitment events in APAC, in fact, as well. So I'm particularly proud that we're continuing to do these events and participate in these events, both internally and externally as well. And this all builds on the public positions that we take as well. We campaigned together with a few hundred other organizations here in the US for the safe passage of the Equality Act. So really doubling down on our advocacy, in society as well. And we hope that the Senate will one day pass the Equality Act as well.
Yeah. And I think to add one component, and then I will invite Christos and Lizzie to speak, because otherwise we take the space all the time. But when thinking about because last year before the pandemic, we were thinking about building a European Inclusion Week. Yeah, so we were looking at it for diversity is a given, inclusion is a choice, and we wanted to do that face to face, actually in Hamburg, flying in like 300, 400, 500 colleagues and the rest a bit virtually. And the participation would have been quite limited, actually. And the pandemic forced us to rethink our concept significantly. And at the end, it was a much better concept, because we invited 42,000 people from Europe, from the EMEA region, to join actually the Inclusion Week for all the ERGs we are having in EMEA, which is LGBTIQ, our open and out ERG, or also Gen Now, which is more around the generational cohesion, WLI, which is around leaders as the Women in Leadership Council. So therefore, all the ERGs had their space there, and we invited 40,000 colleagues, including everyone from our production sites, which was very unique because this is not easy to do. We had a technology platform, and the pandemic actually forced us to think so differently that we became really inclusive. Otherwise, our Inclusion Week would not have been that inclusive. We would have reduced or limited the participation, but with that we really opened it up and became super inclusive. So those are kind of some examples where actually it opened up even the horizon and opportunities rather than what we would have done before. So really cool. And with that, maybe I invite Lizzie or Christos maybe to share something.
I'm happy to have my go. I'm quite new in my organization, so actually I wouldn't necessarily be the best person to talk about what Immediate's been doing past the 2 months that I've been here. But I do think it's a really interesting point, I think, for everyone thinking about how our view of accessibility has changed. Because I think before, and even thinking about like my experience at university, where there was pushback to getting things that were online or more accessible from home. And people always used to say, oh, we just can't do that, or it's not as effective. And I agree that there are always going to be issues. And, you know, having a face-to-face workshop is going to be better in some situations than doing something online. But I think for a lot of us, especially people who are maybe smaller and don't have those 40,000 people who they've been trying to access anyway, actually realizing that, you know, we can do this online and we can do this really effectively online and get a lot of people on board and get people engaged in a different way, in a way that is accessible both in a physical way, but also like thinking about, I don't know, mental like health and mental like just being there mentally, and how you can take that step back and you're in your home and you're in your safe space in that way. I think it's given us a really interesting perspective on, you know, how work will work going forward, and how this isn't necessarily something we're just going to stop doing if things open up even more. It's something that we need to, you know, understand has enabled us to be closer in some ways, even when we're physically further apart. So I think it's taught a lot of really interesting things from that perspective.
Absolutely. Christos, what's also been doing?
I think in a very similar way, we're very fortunate here at Autotrade. We operate in the UK and Ireland, loads of different sites, and we have loads of people all around the UK. We're very fortunate because we have established employee networks, and when the pandemic came, we were very quickly mobilized our employee networks in order to change the way that they deliver the commitments. One of the things that they focused on from early on in the pandemic is to really look at the internal communities, especially the LGBT plus community, and create initiatives that will first and foremost look after their well-being, because we knew that that's something that's going to be suffering for everyone. So I think one of the key things that the network did was created those opportunities for all of them to stay connected. And it has been so important for people that might have felt a lot more isolated during this time. A lot of the support networks that didn't have access to anymore. And those networks create opportunities all the time to get together. And also, very similar to the other panelists, we were able to carry out events that we wouldn't normally do. We had speakers, some great speakers from all over the world as well, that we wouldn't normally be able to host. And I think it has taught us a lot those months. I think going as soon as the restrictions are lifted more and more, I think a combination of face-to-face activities that there are definitely positives and definitely advantages to face-to-face activities, especially when it comes to a lot of our workshops and a lot of our training that in some cases delves a lot deeper into certain issues. And some people, could be preference, it could be because of the subject that's been discussed, would prefer to have certain conversations face-to-face. So I think moving forward is we're looking at the things that really worked and taking the best of what's worked so that we can look into the future.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And Christos, I absolutely agree with what you say as well. In my experience, what I found throughout in recent times as well, particularly during the pandemic, is employees are looking for different ways to maintain and build social capital and relationship capital, and networks and ERGs, BRGs have such a pivotal role to play, and particularly for hidden and invisible communities within the organization as well. So absolutely, if anything, I've seen attendance of BRG, ERG network events skyrocket and go through the roof, because employees recognize that different ways now to build and maintain social capital, relationship capital at work.
Definitely. Just moving on a little bit, creating safe spaces. If you were on Shiva's session earlier, she was sharing about confidentiality in work and how important it is not just to share pronouns, but about thinking about people's confidentiality. And they were definitely referring to the fact about non-binary. And Lizzie, I'm just going to come to you and just see, what does that look like? What safe spaces and what's your experience of creating safe spaces while working from home?
Yeah, I think it's actually been really interesting hearing other people's perspectives as well as my own of a safe space at home. So I think thinking about my age group, perhaps. So when I finished my degree from home last year, we all had to go back, and I went back to my parents because otherwise I would have nowhere to go. And I think a lot of people had that same experience. I'm quite lucky in that I have a very supportive home environment, and one where I do feel safe and I feel, loved and supported by my parents and they accept me. But for a lot of people, that wouldn't have been the case. And I think we can see this potentially at work as well, where for some people, work has been their safe space, and that physical area to be themselves has been that place where, they can bring their whole selves or as much as themselves as they want to work. And that then goes if they have to stay at home and don't have that physical space anymore. But I think from this, we can think wider and think, what have we been trying to make? A safe space doesn't necessarily have to be that physical area that you're in. It can be the conversations you're having with people. It can be that connection. I was watching the Love and Empathy panel that happened this morning, which I really enjoyed because I think it really highlighted how important it is to, build those relationships with your colleagues where they feel respected, supported, and listened to, and safe. and psychologically safe as well as physically safe. And so I think this moving to online, where maybe people haven't been able to move away from a home life or move away from a life where maybe they haven't been able to be themselves, we're then needing to create that psychological safety online in this virtual way as well. So there's that side of things. And then there's the other side where some people have actually said that being online and being from home has actually been easier for them to be maybe more themselves and bring more of themselves into the workspace. So having that kind of connection between work and home, that, you know, I'm literally in my bedroom, and that's something that, you know, I wouldn't usually just invite you all around. Like that would seems like a barrier that we've all just forgotten about, but it naturally creates some level of closeness that maybe we didn't have before, and also creates that level of ease. Like, I'm in my home, I could just leave now and no one can chase after me and find me again. And so I've heard of people who maybe have been experimenting with expression and bringing different levels of that of themselves to work, and that this virtual environment has enabled that, and their team being there and having, you know, those daily catch-ins, which maybe you wouldn't have had before when you just saw each other all the time in the office, has really made a difference. So I think it's a two-sided thing. I think people are experiencing a lot of different things, and it's really interesting to listen to those and maybe think about how we can take that into, you know, the potential hybrid working that we're all going towards, and how that will be a change for people again, you know, and maybe that will be a step back for people, or that will be a step forward again. So it's definitely something, you know, for us all to consider, I think.
Definitely. Has anybody else got anything to add into that?
Yeah, although I think there is, when I think about it, when I reflect on it, I think there is a clear difference between office work and production site work, because the production sites, they were never asked to work from home. At least not in our case. The same for development floors, yeah, because you can't develop a truck in your kitchen. You simply cannot, yeah. Or it's very hard to do that. Yeah? And you can't have a production line built into your living room, basically. Yeah. So therefore, I think there is also a bit of a differentiation needed. I think what did that mean for people who are working in office spaces, who can easily or more easily work from home in comparison to the ones who simply were on site, yeah, and needed to be on site because their work couldn't get done from home. So therefore, I think there's different concepts in behind, and I would be very curious to hear actually perspectives also from the ones who continue to be on the production sites throughout the pandemic, because I think the perspective is quite different to what we think from an office perspective, how it evolved.
I think
it's something that Auto Trader's in. Go on.
Christos, no, go ahead.
I think it's very interesting. I think, you know, as we know, our community, especially the LGBT plus community, and all our different people, you can't have that one size that fits all. It could be the circumstances of people's jobs. It could be the needs that they have that change over time. It could be the preference. So I think when we're exploring all these new ways of working as well, we need to keep that in mind. And I think a lot of the narrative needs to change. A lot of the narrative is saying, is working from home better than working in the office? And it seems like I think now we need to evolve that conversation, evolve that narrative to actually look at individuals and look at individuals. And I think now being inclusive is about giving options to people. And in some cases, though, those options are not as easy as working from home, like Thorsten said. So I think it's always really important, especially a lot of us who do jobs like this that tend to be at home, tend to have the luxury of working at home in the office, to always remember that.
I think, you know, for me, you know, what I was thinking as well as this conversation was going, as I was leading into my own experiences, you know, for me, the first place that I came out was the workplace. You know, and for so many, particularly for LGBT people of color folk, the workplace, you know, as we look at it as well, you know, because of cultural reasons and many other reasons, and not just for people of color, but for so many, the workplace is the only safest place to come out. As we talk about safest places as well, you know, for a variety of reasons as well, and leaning into my own experiences as well. You know, be it in a factory or be it in an office, the workplace is often the only safest place to come out as well. But Lizzie, I love what you're talking about, empathy. You know, I know it's a word that's often used, you know, particularly, you know, it's become, you know, one of the words of 2020, right? And yeah, you know, and as a D&I practitioner, you know, it is really, really important, you know, and I'm glad to see it gaining the you know, the rightful traction that it should, you know, because for me, empathy creates proximity. Empathy creates proximity through those safe spaces, through those sharings, etc. So empathy creates proximity, which in turn creates trust, and that trust, it creates exposure. And that exposure, you actually get data because you're more exposed to difference as well, and that can reduce biases and increases inclusion. And that is why, you know, empathy is so important, particularly in the business world.
Absolutely. And I think maybe you've got that when you see people holding a baby in their arms or whatever on the camera, or, you know, or when we've got people, you know, working in their bedrooms, it gives you that that human aspect. And I know a lot of companies now have got these backgrounds to kind of hide that, and that has its place in some places where, you know, you might want to restrict for whatever reason, people seeing, you know, personal things going on behind, but also that human contact of understanding where people's environment is, you know, I think is also something that helps you connect to people and makes it really real when you've got someone's dog barking in the background or the cat walks across the screen or whatever happens. And it just makes us feel human again.
Yeah, there is
and I think that lies in your empathy.
Exactly, and there is this new term actually, humanization of work. Yeah, I mean that's so interesting. Yeah, this is like the creation of the pandemic, because I've never had more colleagues in my living room than actually in the past 12 months, literally. Yeah, so you know, and it's really funny. And the other thing actually around the safe spaces, and I think that's also something which is quite stunning to observe, because interactions or actually entering spaces became much more intentional. I found. Yeah. In the past, when I was in the office, I bumped into people, water cooler chat, etc. So it was quite unintentional. It was great, but it was quite unintentional. But now when I reach out to somebody, because I will not walk around and I'm not seeing the person in the cafeteria, for instance, so it becomes so much more intentional. So it's actually, I think about it very thoughtfully and then pick up not really the phone, but dialed MS Teams, whatever, yeah, and intentionally reach out to somebody in order to have that dialogue. And I think that has a quality. I hope we will not lose that.
That works both ways, doesn't it? So there's sometimes having that water cooler chat might actually widen your scope of people that you come into contact with, and people might know your face, but you don't know theirs, where you intentionally reach out to people you're aware of. You know, people might reach out to you because they meet you, they see you in the canteen or wherever it is that you are walking, and they bump into you and they, oh, Thorsten, you know. And so I think kind of you miss that, and I think we lose some of that as well. So it's about creating those spaces where people can do that. So maybe it is just round tables, maybe it's town halls with just open kind of ask any question.
Yeah, I found that actually as a new starter for a company, I found that quite interesting, because I joined a year in, everyone was very used to things, and my team had a daily call set up. Like, that's just what we do. We have a daily half-an-hour call. We don't always make it, but it's in the diary and it's purposefully there. And as a new starter joining remotely to, you know, basically my first proper job, and to people who I'd never met before, and I don't actually live in the place where the office is at the moment, and all this kind of stuff, that was really valuable to me, to have those intentional check-ins, and people, it does feel different, because I've been into the office a few times now, and that casual stuff of like seeing people and being like, oh, I actually know who that person is, and you can then have a chat, is different. But having that starting with a team that intentionally checks in and knows that it's important to intentionally check in has actually been really, really good for me. And I think that's, you know, I think people have been quite scared of how can we create that, like, I'm safe space, because that's the question, but how can we create that good space for new starters? And I think that intentional check-in is such a valuable and important part of it.
That really leads on to a really nice fit into another thing we were going to talk about, and that's mental health. you know, and people's mental health and dealing with that. So, you know, we were talking earlier about different initiatives that actually, you know, are people, because they've been isolated, you know, do you think LGBT people have had more challenges with their mental health? What's your views on that? Have you had to work extra hard in certain areas more than others?
So at Autotrader, during this time, we have been doing regular check-in surveys with our colleagues every 2 months. And then we analyze the results of this check-in surveys by the different characteristics, including our LGBT plus colleagues. And consistently, their questions related to mental health are an indication that our LGBT plus colleagues are struggling with their mental health disproportionately compared to all our other colleagues. Again, I don't want to make any generalizations. This is only about Autotrader. This is only about our people. And we've been very careful not to make assumptions and generalizations. So that's why we worked with our network, with our employee network, in order to make sure that we discuss this with our colleagues and we get more qualitative feedback to see behind what the numbers are telling us. And what we were able to do is collaborate with our mental health first aid network. So we've got, it's about 12 people that are trained mental health first aiders and are there to offer support to our colleagues. And they collaborate with the network to make sure that everyone knows about the support that's available for our colleagues. All the support pathways, different support pathways with our employee assistance program and mental health first aiders, and other things that you can do more proactively as well. So we're hoping that will have an impact. And this is quite something recent we put in place. Well, hopefully that will have an impact. Yeah, so the indications there that to answer your question, that they have been disproportionately affected for many reasons. I think a lot of our people have not necessarily have access to their support network, their wider, friends and family. Sometimes, there might be away as well from them. So I think that has an impact.
Yeah,
Vinny, oh, go on.
No, go ahead.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I know you're really keen on data and insights from that. So,
and this is one of the things, LGBT mental health, it's one of the things that keeps me awake at night, is that we've seen the disproportionate impact it's had. I was looking at some research just the other day where, LGBT folk, nearly 74%, 3/4 have said, that worry and stress from the pandemic has had a negative impact on their mental health compared to 49% who don't identify as LGBT. So we see the disproportionate impact as well. And we also see that those reporting that impact as well, to say that they're more likely to say that their negative impact has been major as well. So we see the disproportionate impact. These are one things that keeps me awake at night. And I think, I believe that the mental health challenges as we come, I wouldn't say as an end to the pandemic, but as we come through this pandemic, are only just beginning. And I think that there's almost going to be a wave of what our mental health challenges, because so many people are literally, in survival mode at the moment, and I think we'll look back and, and think, oh my God, what just happened? And I think we're just right now, I think right now it literally feels like there's, there's a lot more to come in this space.
Mm. And I would agree with that totally. I think this is only the starting point, and we don't see actually what's coming. I think it's a big avalanche actually, and a bit, and I'm really curious to see that. But I think also there's differences between countries, because I know that you guys in the UK, you were really hit hard, yeah. So you needed to stay at home. You couldn't leave the house for more than 4 or 5 miles or whatever it was, yeah. And this was never the case in Switzerland, for instance. Yeah, so we were always able to be outside. We were always able to do our sports, our hike, etc. We could do like walking meetings and walk, maybe with a mask, maybe with some distance between us. But we had some opportunity to connect. We didn't hug, obviously, but there was a bit of that in the past, and we never had that super hard lockdown that I saw in some of the other countries. So therefore, I think it looks also different from country to country, and I would say, or I would think actually that the numbers could look differently in different countries. But I would also be curious to see numbers around single parents who needed to do homeschooling or so, because I think they were hit very hard as well, so because they had double duty all of a sudden at home, needed to take care of a kid, maybe a single parent. I mean, that's quite stressful, quite hard. They might not be isolated, they might not have been isolated, but I think they had a lot of pressure on their shoulders. So I think there is a lot of research that's hopefully coming and give us a bit more insights in that.
Definitely. And like you say, single parents, I've got colleagues that felt really isolated, and they just wanted another adult to speak to that wasn't work-based. It wasn't about work. They were joining meetings, but it was all day long was work, and then they were just talking to children, and they really wanted just some normal adult conversation outside of work. And actually, they became allies to our community, just because we had this sort of social community going on for the LGBT people, and the allies kind of felt that actually it kind of helped them as well. So that was something that really worked in Fujitsu. Has anybody got anything else to think about that? Has anything really worked in I was just referring to kind of some social sort of, we were using WhatsApp, for example, but has anything sort of really worked that you could share that maybe other organizations considered using, doing to help people's mental health? Is there anything you'd like to shout about? No.
Yeah, I think the things that really worked for us is the fact that the regular opportunities for people to connect. I think the talking openly about mental health has been very important, and the fact that people are able to share their stories. People we'll have a lot of people that have found the time maybe and the inclination to do a lot of blogs. And express themselves in that way and be more open. So I think that encourages a lot of openness and conversation across our colleagues, and together with all the supportive pathways that we have, and again giving people different options that they can support their own mental health. I think that has been paying some dividends for us here at Autotrader.
And same, I think it's creating those communities within the organization where those conversations can happen as well, and to continue to create those spaces within the organization on many strands, looking at with a view to intersectionality as well, and to make sure those spaces are held as well. And Thorsten, you mentioned something as well, about the different environments and different contexts as well. I think there's also, and to build on that, I think there's also a piece around, identify as being of South Asian heritage, born in Europe and now living in the Americas as well. And the mental health conversation is very different globally, as we all know, in different jurisdictions, and the levels of stigma, even around having the mental health conversation, as we all know, is very different. And it's, and some countries are more advanced on the journey, and some countries just aren't. So it's a particular challenge. Like I said, but like as you mentioned, I think we're just at the beginning of our mental health challenges. I think we've literally just been in some kind of survival mode for the past 18 months or so.
Definitely. And you're just talking there about people making themselves vulnerable, and creating that space where people can be vulnerable and share stories and share personal experiences. Thorsten, is that something that you've been doing?
No, and I think actually, no, I was just thinking about it a bit broader, the well-being. And I think I know it from J&J and I know it from Novartis. Yeah, they have programs in place, yeah, like Energy for Performance, yeah, where they look into movement, where they look into how to nutrition, sleep, and elements that actually influence the well-being in a much broader context. Yeah, and I think this was really helpful that we had programs like this in place, because of mental health is one thing, is about the stress situation and the isolation and maybe the stress with the homeschooling and all those elements. But there's also opportunities to, with a bit more movement, yeah, really having those stretch bands at home or walking around in the living room or eating healthy, actually to influence that in a particular way. And having those tips and tricks for us really helped actually. But we also saw in our sentiment surveys that we needed to constantly repeat and those offerings and actually encourage to leverage those, because people tend to forget at some point in time, or maybe I don't know exactly what was holding some away, but the repetition was very, very important. Just remind us, think about that. Think about our EAP programs, so the employee assistance programs, in case you have challenging questions or in case you need support. Speak to your line manager, preparing the line managers for those conversations. Yeah, but creating spaces like upros, like evening drink things, like morning coffees, whatever it was. But there was a lot of activities around that, and still this is a topic for us, because it is about fatigue. It's very much around fatigue actually, so but I think it's even broader than only the mental piece. It's really the physical and goes actually beyond that.
I think it's really interesting you talking about how you have to keep reassuring people almost that they have things that they're allowed to, ask for and reach out for. Because I definitely think, I don't know if this is like a young person thing, but sometimes I can be very outspoken and sometimes I can think I don't want to, like, I don't know if I can ask for these things. And, even though stuff might be there, having that repeated, whether it's in newsletters or that kind of thing is really important for a lot of people who maybe are a bit unsure if they can take advantage of things. But as well as that, I think the point of fatigue is maybe an interesting thing to kind of discuss, because I think if we're thinking about how can we give space to people, how can we provide people and cater to their needs, but how can we also make sure we're okay? We might lead this as people and as role models, potentially show ourselves as being vulnerable, like you were talking about, Mel, earlier. And that's effective and that's really useful for people. And having that person, role models obviously are extremely useful, and having someone where you can go, oh, they've done that, so maybe I can have a go, or they've done that, maybe I can talk to them about that, is amazing and useful. But I think mental health, if we're talking about that, we need to think about all of us who are putting that extra effort in and really trying to, provide for our people as well, because we're part of the community, and we need that support too. So I think that's like kind of an interesting, it's not at all on our list of questions, just giving away that we had a list of questions, but I thought that might be an interesting thing to kind of touch on.
No, definitely. I think we've gone full circle there, haven't we? Sort of talking about, creating those safe spaces, creating those opportunities to talk and share stories, but also being aware that actually there is, exhaustion from that. And people find that just too much. And going back to what you were saying before about intentionally managers reaching out and making those intentional conversations is really important, because you mentioned there about EAP, but not everyone wants to put their hand out and say, actually, I need help. I want to reach out to EAP. People, a lot of people think, no, I'm too strong. I can do this. I can deal with it. And they don't want to ask for help. And actually those intentional conversations from people like managers checking in regularly really helps. And Lizzie, I was really conscious of yourself, joining the new organization and what that looks like, and trying to get fitting into a new team, and and then coming out, if you were failing, like you could come out to other work colleagues about being non-binary, and do you not? This is a new thing, are you going to be accepted? How does that feel? And you don't pick up the same social cues the same from being virtual that you might do if you're sat in the office.
Yeah, definitely. I think from the non-binary perspective, I wasn't out on my placement. So I did a placement in my third year of uni, and I did not start my placement as out as non-binary. It was quite a new thing for me, actually, personally, at the time. I was out to family and friends, but I didn't want to come out at work. I was quite clearly like somewhere in the LGBT community, mostly just because my entire CV was just really gay. So I feel like people kind of had a bit of an idea that there was something there, but I wasn't out as non-binary. And that was really hard for me, especially because I wanted to put so much, I put so much effort into helping with the LGBT network at work and writing the transition guidelines. And like, it was such a personal thing to me, but I couldn't share that it was a personal thing because I wasn't out. And so it was a very intentional decision to be out straight away for this new job. And when I was applying for jobs, I had my pronouns on my CV. My LinkedIn is very clear. I have my pronouns and it says I'm non-binary on there. And it was a very intentional decision for me to kind of force a space. And that's also just very me. Like, I'm quite, I don't know, unapologetically non-binary in a lot of situations. But it also meant that now I do have a job. I found a workplace and a team that is accepting straight away and is trying and is putting the effort into, using my pronouns and referring to me in the correct way. And that's something that I have friends who didn't have that because they didn't want to put that on their CV, because at the end of the day, it might be illegal to discriminate against someone with a protected characteristic like that, but companies are still going to do it, and they just won't tell you that's the reason they did it. And so for me, that was really important, that I was my whole self straight away. And that's only come from, my support at home, my support with my friends, and I guess I don't want to call it luck, because all workplaces should be like the experience I'm having. But I guess the fortunateness of me having the opportunity to talk to these people and get a job somewhere where they will respect me straight away. And something also for anyone who's listening, who's a bit unsure of how to, deal with non-binary new starters. I actually, a member of my team in my first week had a one-on-one with me and asked what I wanted. Like, she basically said, I know that your pronouns are they, them because they're on your CV. Would you like me to tell the team? How would you like me to tell the team? Would you like to tell the team? How do you want to go forward with this? And it was the most surreal situation, because I've never had that. And it was so affirming and such an important thing for me. And so such a queer joy moment. And that's, don't be afraid to like have those conversations and to actually be like, okay, well, you know what you need. Let's sit down and talk about what you need in this situation. Because that really meant a lot to me at the very beginning for my job.
Awesome. I've actually got a question from Tracy. Tracy works for a small organisation that's got only about 100 employees. And Tracy was asking, what does that look like? You've talked about ERGs and the power of ERGs and employee resource groups. But for organisations where you've got a small number of people, what can you do? Do you think there should be an employee resource group that kind of covers everybody? Do you think there's reason for specific ones? What are your thoughts? For small businesses? Look,
for me, it's clear, an ERG doesn't have to be hundreds and hundreds. 2 people can make an ERG.
Yeah, I would echo that. So by having experience here at AutoTrader, being on the journey with all our ERGs from the beginning, it only took 1 or 2 people to start it. So that's all you need, 1 or 2 people that have a particular interest or their own lived experience, or, and hopefully bringing some allies in. And, but that Tracy is right. Maybe if you just have one that covers lots of different aspects of diversity, that might be more helpful, especially at the beginning of your D&I initiatives.
Or to start maybe with one or two at the beginning, yeah. So because when I observe the so either what Christos was saying, to have one covering more topics, or maybe to focus on one or two topics in particular at the beginning, maybe some focus topics, yeah. Because when you start, it always helps to focus rather than to go too broad right away. So therefore, maybe that is an opportunity, yeah, to start slow and with one pilot, so to speak. And because it is a self-forming group anyway, yeah, so there is not a lot of orchestration usually needed. It is more collaborative and more in the system, basically. So, but my advice would be maybe to focus on one or two to start with and experiment.
Yeah, I always say build it and they will come. And takes one to start, two in a meeting. Build it and they will come.
And I
It's
think
interesting
also sorry, Mel, you can go ahead.
No, carry on, Lizzie, carry on.
I was just thinking that it's interesting because there's challenges with starting in a huge organization as well. So if there isn't something in your huge organization, or maybe there is, but like it's not really happening, that can feel really overwhelming as well, because you have then thousands of people you have to contact. I think there's a benefit with having smaller in that maybe you all know each other. There's 100 of you and you're quite connected in teams, perhaps. Maybe this is something that you can talk about in a more casual way, and actually understand what your 100 people need, or maybe what your 100 people could have to grow. So thinking of recruitment as well, like understanding what you're missing, what people need. But I agree, I think it doesn't have to be big and fancy. It can be something really small. And maybe you can think about, well, shall we focus on maybe seeing if we could get some supportive policies written, and that could be your first goal, and that's still an achievement, even if there's only 2 or 3 of you doing it.
Yeah, there was an earlier session that was talking about, the ERGs can be different, have different aspects. There can be the social aspect and bringing people together and making them feel a part of a community, but then you've also got the trying to drive change in the business. And sometimes maybe it's just that starting socially, understanding, getting to know each other, feeling that sense of community, and then looking at how you can influence change. And just, having, what do you want out of this? What is, what do people want to get out of it? Thank you very much. Lizzie, I've got a question for you, just while we're on questions. As a millennial, how do you see employees driving changes for LGBTQ people? And can you give a couple of examples of what you'd like to see? So you did mention before about starting a conversation about being non-binary.
Yeah, this is really funny because I'm Gen Z. I'm so young. I'm not even a millennial. But I think it's interesting because maybe I'll talk about how my when I was looking for jobs. So I think sometimes we focus a lot on what's going on internally, and how we can support our internal colleagues, which obviously is extremely important because people will leave if you don't. But I think as someone looking for jobs and who's only just got one, so it's all quite fresh on my mind, an external presence is also really important, and it's something I look for straight away. So when I was looking for jobs, I would look up their DE&I page. So if they had one, I'd look up sustainability, because that's also really important to me. And then I'd look up their gender pay gap, because I'm curious and I want to know what it is. And if I found nothing, then that would kind of be not a great thing for me. Like it would feel a bit odd that they hadn't talked about it, because surely they have something, even if it's just their gender pay gap. And companies where they proudly talked about their DE&I initiatives externally, even if that's just through LinkedIn. So I'd often actually look on LinkedIn and see, do they have a DE&I manager, for example? That external presence is so important to get young people in, because it's not just me and my personal need, I guess, of wanting to feel like I can belong as a non-binary person and as a queer person at work, but also my straight friends, my straight family, they will think I don't want to work for a company that won't support Lizzie. So there's that thought as well. You're missing out on quite a lot of people. Gonna admit I've forgotten the question, but does that give some answer?
I think you're right. Definitely about shouting about what you do is important, and the power of social media. I think,
Yes.
you know, I'm Gen X, and you know, social media is something that's come about, you know, in my later working life, and I think we're still catching on a little bit of the power of it, and how, you know, sort of it can really, you know, when I talk to our grads and people coming in Fujitsu, they're investigating, as you said, you know, what are the organization doing? What are they saying out there on social media? What is being said about them? It's really important. But also, you know, as you say, for parents, you know, I've got an ally that's in our network who, you know, he's joined our organization because, you know, he felt supported because of his trans child, and felt that, you know, the company was a good place to work, and that actually attracted him back to the company. So, you know, it does have a knock-on effect to people, and you don't know what people are looking for. So it's really important that we shout about some of the amazing work that we're doing. So I've got a question from Floyd Johnson. The question is, does the panel have experiences they can share about the pros and cons of industry or trade associations based on D&I projects or networks? Any takers? Do you want me to say that again? Does the panel have any experiences that they would like to share about the pros or cons of industry trade associations for D&I projects? So, you know, maybe that's associations with Stonewall and such like.
Yeah, absolutely. Throughout my professional career, absolutely. You know, from diversity, equity, inclusion. You know, I've often said no one's got this sorted. No one's going to get there first, and no one's going to get there alone. We're all, you know, so absolutely. Industry bodies, trade associations, CDO peer groups, any, you know, all absolutely essential.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of associations, a lot of charities that are doing great work, and I think it's a space that people need to collaborate more. This is not the space to be competitive with each other. I think that, you know, D&I, like Lizzie mentioned about attracting people, can be a competitive advantage. But I think the more you share, the more you collaborate with other businesses across your industry. So we're very fortunate. We've had a partnership with inclusive companies in the UK that brings together loads of different businesses with a focus on D&I. And the things that we've managed to do together and learn from each other through the years has been really inspiring. So I think definitely collaborate more.
Yeah, and it's really around the learning from each other. I think something you were basically saying, Christos. I remember when in one of my previous employers, it was Sandoz by then. Actually, we were working with an organization. It was headquartered in Germany, so we were working with an organization called Proud at Work, and it was fantastic to see. Actually, we were invited to all kind of roundtables with Googles in Germany and with Ernst & Young, and to award ceremonies at the Telecom T-Mobile headquarters, and the exchange amongst those companies was absolutely breathtaking. And for us, we started only a few years before we were early starters. We were awarded as the rising stars because we came up with a lot of initiatives, great initiatives in very, very short periods of time. However, we learned so much from those companies who had established ERGs because we were at our starting point. So I would really encourage to look out and learn from those companies. It's
I'm going to cut in there because we've only got a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to just cut in, sorry. We talked about one of the questions before about, you know, employing small businesses, joining up with other organizations and doing collaboration is a really great opportunity to help with those. Any key takeaways, Christos, really quickly, one-liner. Chris, have you got any key takeaways from today's session?
I think the most important thing is that keep your people engaged and listen to your people within your company and get them to be part of the solution.
Excellent. Vinay?
As Lizzie mentioned, empathy, empathy, empathy.
For me, it would be organizational size doesn't matter.
I didn't
Every
catch that.
organization.
Sorry,
Sorry.
sorry, I missed that. Go on, say that again.
Organizational size doesn't matter. It bring the topic forward, and if you're a small, mid-sized, large company, it's good everywhere.
Yeah, and I'd say, I guess don't forget what we've experienced. Like, let's take this forward. Let's keep going rather than reverse. This is a great opportunity for us to just get on with it and keep running with this great flow. And yeah.
Well, we look like we're out of time. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your time. Thank you for just participating. Everyone that's listened to us today, I hope you've got something to take away. Thank you to Equality Leaders for letting us come and join you on the LGBT Summit. And thank you and good afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.